Please don't hurt me. I'll bear you sons. The poor girl begged the Duke. She was drenched in rain, debt collectors closing in, her life about to be destroyed. But instead of cruelty, the Duke pulled her into his carriage, saving her with a single command. Inside the castle walls, whispers spread. Servants gasped, nobles mocked, and a jealous lady swore she would ruin the girl forever. What began as a desperate plea soon became a dangerous scandal, threatening the Duke's title, his lands, even his very soul. Yet hidden in the shadows lies a secret, a forgotten promise from the past that could change everything. But if it comes to light, will it unite them or tear them apart? When love defies birth and blood, will mercy be strong enough to conquer pride, or will the world crush them before their hearts can claim each other? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The autumn wind howled across the muddy road like a hungry beast, whipping dead leaves through the air. Annabel Hart pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders, but the fabric was no match for nature's fury. The last rays of daylight were fading fast, turning the countryside into a dreary canvas of grays and browns. Her feet ached with every step, and the empty basket at her side felt as heavy as lead. The day's meager earnings jingled in her pocket, not nearly enough. The thought made her chest tighten with worry. Just a bit further, she whispered to herself, though her legs trembled with exhaustion. The mud sucked at her worn shoes, and the relentless rain had soaked through to her stockings hours ago. A sudden gust caught her cloak, tearing at the already fraying seams. Annabel stumbled, barely catching herself against the gnarled oak tree. Her fingers scraped against the rough bark as she fought to stay upright. Well, what have we here? The gravelly voice made her blood run cold. Through the curtain of rain, she saw two burly figures emerging from the shadows of the road. The debt collectors. They'd been haunting the village for days, and now they'd found her. Miss Hart, the taller one sneered, moving to block her path. Your father's debts have come due. Please, Annabel whispered, backing away. I haven't enough yet, but I'm working. Time's up, the second man growled. His face was pocked with old scars, his eyes gleaming with cruel intent. But we've got an arrangement that might interest you. There's always need for pretty maids in certain establishments. Bonded service, they call it. Horror washed over Annabel as their meaning became clear. She'd heard whispers of such arrangements, young women trapped in brothels until impossible debts were paid. No, she gasped, turning to flee. But her sodden skirts tangled around her legs, and she sprawled into the mud. The men's laughter cut through the storm's roar as they advanced. Now, no need to run. A warm yellow glow suddenly pierced the gloom, accompanied by the sound of carriage wheels and horses' hooves. The debt collectors hesitated, squinting into the light. The carriage was magnificent even in the downpour, its black lacquered surface reflecting the lantern light. 4 matched bay horses drew it through the storm, their harnesses gleaming with brass fittings. On the door panel, a familiar coat of arms stood out in gold leaf, the Duke of Wexford's crest. The carriage drew to a halt, and a tall figure emerged. Even without his military uniform, Duke Damien of Wexford cut an imposing figure. His broad shoulders were draped in a fine wool coat, and his expression was thunderous as he surveyed the scene. Annabel scrambled to her knees in the mud, terror and desperate hope warring in her chest. "Your Grace!" she cried out. "Please don't hurt me. I'll bear you sons if it will save me." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, born of pure panic. A shocked silence fell, broken only by the pattering rain. The Duke's stern face softened for just a moment with something like pity or perhaps pain. Without a word, he strode forward and lifted Annabel from the mud as easily as if she were a child. His hands were gentle despite their strength, These men are troubling you?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel. "My father's debts, Your Grace," Annabel managed to whisper. "He died in the war. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. "Indeed." He turned to his footman, who had descended from the carriage. "See these men off my lands. I will settle any legitimate debts through proper channels." The debt collectors backed away, bowing and scraping. "Of course, Your Grace, we meant no harm. Go." The single word carried enough authority to send them scrambling into the darkness. The Duke guided Annabel toward the carriage, his arms steady around her trembling shoulders. "Come, we'll get you warm and dry at Wexford Castle." As the footman helped her up into the luxurious interior, Annabel caught a glimpse of the Duke's face in the lantern light. There was something unreadable in his expression as he watched her, something that made her heart skip despite her fear and exhaustion. The carriage door closed with a solid dunk, and they began to move through the storm toward the looming silhouette of Wexford Castle. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar leaded windows, casting diamond patterns across Annabel's face. For a moment, she lay still, confused by the softness beneath her and the warm weight of proper blankets. The previous night felt like a fever dream. The storm, the debt collectors, and the Duke's intervention. The chamber was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and sturdy oak furniture. A small fire crackled in the hearth, fighting off the autumn chill. Annabel sat up slowly, wincing at her aching muscles. A gentle knock preceded the entrance of a young maid carrying a wooden tray. Steam rose from a bowl of fragrant broth, and beside it sat a chunk of fresh bread. "Good morning, miss," the maid said, setting down the tray. "His Grace has given instructions that you're to be cared for. You're under his protection now." She spoke the words carefully, as if still unsure of them herself. Annabel's hands trembled as she reached for the spoon. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from crying. Before she could finish the meal, another knock echoed through the room. This time, it was the Duke himself who entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. Annabel scrambled to stand, merely knocking over the broth. "Please, remain seated," Damien said, his voice gentler than she remembered from the night before. In daylight, she could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, and the way his face held both strength and weariness. "I trust you slept well?" "Yes, Your Grace. I cannot thank you enough for your kindness." He moved to stand by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "There is no need for thanks." What those men threatened was unconscionable. He turned to face her, his expression grave. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Hart. My household is in need of a skilled seamstress. The position would provide you with room, board, and a fair wage." Annabel's heart leaped, even as her mind raced with concerns. "Your Grace is too generous, but—" The gossip ... She twisted her hands in her lap. "Let me be clear," Damien said firmly. "You will be under Mrs. Klein's supervision, with all the protection and propriety that implies. Your father saved my life in battle. I would do no less than offer his daughter honest work." Tears pricked at Annabel's eyes. "Then I accept, Your Grace, with all my heart." Later that morning, Mrs. Klein herself led Annabel to the sewing room. The housekeeper was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every wrinkle in Annabel's borrowed dress. "You'll work here with the others," Mrs. Klein said crisply, gesturing to a sunny room where 3 women sat with their needlework. "We maintain high standards at Wexford Castle. I trust you will meet them." The other seamstresses looked up with undisguised curiosity. They were neat, respectable women whose careful curtsies spoke of years in service. Their welcoming smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. "This is Miss Hart," Mrs. Klein announced. "She joins us by His Grace's command." The emphasis on those last words made Annabel's cheeks burn. The afternoon passed in a blur of introductions and instructions. Annabel's fingers found comfort in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread, even as she felt the weight of watchful eyes. Every time Mrs. Klein passed the doorway, her scrutiny was almost physical. When the dinner bell rang, Annabel followed the other servants to the great hall below stairs. The servants' dining room hummed with quiet conversation and the clink of pewter spoons against bowls. She found a seat at the end of a long wooden table, grateful for the bowl of stew placed before her. Through the open door, she caught a glimpse of the Duke passing by, his tall figure moving with military precision toward the main dining chamber above. His shoulders were straight, but something in his solitary walk spoke of emptiness. "Poor man," whispered a kitchen maid nearby, shaking her head. "Not one smile since her grace passed, God rest her soul. 2 years now, and still he mourns." Annabel watched him disappear up the stairs, her heart catching strangely in her chest. In that moment, she felt an odd mix of gratitude for his kindness and fear of her precarious position. She was safe, yes, but safety had come at the price of entering a household shadowed by grief, where every eye watched for impropriety, and where her presence alone might spark unwanted gossip. She bent her head over her stew, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. Yet she could not help but think of the Duke's solitary figure, and wonder at the weight of sorrow that could steal a man's smile for so long. The autumn days settled into a gentle rhythm at Wexford Castle. A week had passed since Annabel's arrival, and her nimble fingers had already proven invaluable in the sewing room. The other maids gradually warmed to her presence, sharing gentle smiles and quiet conversation over their needlework. On this particular morning, Mrs. Klein swept into the sewing room, her keys jangling at her waist. "Annabel, you're needed for the banquet preparations. Several gowns require immediate attention." The housekeeper's stern expression softened slightly. "His Grace specifically requested your skill." Annabel's heart fluttered at the mention of the Duke, though she quickly steadied her hands. "Yes, Mrs. Klein, I'll attend to it right away." Throughout the day, Annabel worked tirelessly, mending delicate lace and reinforcing seams. The grand banquet would host nobility from 3 counties, and everything had to be perfect. As evening approached, she gathered the freshly pressed gowns onto a wooden tray, ready to deliver them to their owners. The great hall blazed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off polished silver and crystal goblets. Ladies in silk and gentlemen in velvet filled the space with refined laughter and the rustle of expensive fabric. Annabel kept to the shadows near the wall, making her deliveries as discreetly as possible. She paused near a tapestry, watching Duke Damien at the head table. He sat straight-backed in his chair, his dark blue coat emphasizing his broad shoulders. Though he smiled politely at his guests, the expression didn't reach his eyes. Well, what have we here?" The sharp voice cut through Annabel's thoughts. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe stood before her, resplendent in emerald silk, her lips curved in a cruel smile. A seamstress who forgets her place, perhaps? Or something more? Annabel clutched her tray tighter. "My lady, I'm only delivering the gowns." "Oh, is that what they're calling it now?" Lady Eleanor's voice rose, carrying across the nearby tables. "How convenient that our dear Duke should find such a pretty young thing to warm his halls after dark." The room fell silent for a heartbeat before titters of laughter spread like ripples in a pond. Annabel's cheeks burned as dozens of eyes turned toward her, her vision blurred with tears. "That's quite enough, Lady Eleanor." Duke Damien's voice cut through the laughter like a sword. He had risen from his seat, his expression thunderous. "You forget yourself. Miss Hart is under my protection and will be treated with respect in my home." But the damage was done. Annabel could already hear the whispers, see the knowing looks passed between guests. She backed away, then turned and fled the hall, her footsteps echoing on the stone floors. She ran until she reached her small chamber, closing the door and sinking onto her bed. Tears flowed freely now as she buried her face in her hands. How could she have been so foolish? Standing there, staring at the Duke like some lovesick girl? Lady Eleanor had only given voice to what others must surely think. The castle settled into its nighttime quiet, broken only by the occasional crackle of torches in the corridors. Annabel lay curled on her side, her tears dried but her heart still aching. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. "Miss Hart?" The Duke's voice was gentle, concerned. "Are you well?" Annabel held her breath, keeping perfectly still. She couldn't bear to face him now, couldn't stand to see pity in his eyes. After a moment, she heard him sigh. I am sorry for what happened this evening. Please know that Lady Eleanor's words were completely inappropriate." He paused. "Rest well, Miss Hart." His footsteps faded away down the corridor. Annabel pulled her blanket tighter around herself, fresh tears sliding silently down her cheeks. In the darkness, she wondered if she would ever truly belong in this world of silks and crystals, or if she was destined to remain forever on its edges. Watching from the shadows, the morning sun filtered through leaded glass windows, casting diamond patterns across the stone floors of Wexford Castle. Annabel forced her shoulders back and her chin up as she made her way to the sewing room, though the shame of last night's humiliation still burned in her chest. Each servant she passed seemed to whisper behind raised hands, their eyes following her progress down the corridor. In the sewing room, she found unexpected solace in her work, letting the familiar rhythm of needle and thread soothe her troubled thoughts. As she stitched, soft footsteps in the hallway caught her attention. Looking up, she saw young Margaret Wexford hovering at the doorway, half hidden behind a tapestry. The child's eyes were wide and wary, like those of a frightened fawn. "Good morning, Miss Margaret," Annabel said softly, setting aside her work. "Would you like to see what I'm making?" The girl didn't respond, but she didn't retreat either. Annabel picked up a length of pale blue ribbon and began weaving it between her fingers, creating a simple flower shape. Margaret's eyes followed the movement, curiosity breaking through her reserve. "My mother taught me this trick when I was about your age," Annabel continued, her voice gentle and warm. "Would you like to try?" After a moment's hesitation, Margaret crept closer, her small feet silent on the stone floor. Annabel patted the stool beside her, and to her surprise, the child settled there, reaching tentatively for the ribbon. "Like this," Annabel guided, helping Margaret's small fingers twist the silk. "See how it becomes a rose?" For nearly an hour, they worked together in comfortable quiet, creating a garden of ribbon flowers. Annabel hummed softly as they worked, an old lullaby her mother had sung. The tension gradually eased from Margaret's thin shoulders. "It's pretty," Margaret whispered suddenly, her voice barely audible after months of silence. Annabel's heart leaped, but she kept her movements calm and steady. "Yes, it is," she agreed softly. "Just like you." Unknown to both, the Duke stood in the shadows of the doorway, watching the scene unfold. His stern features softened as he observed his niece's first words in months, spoken so naturally to this gentle seamstress. Later that afternoon, as Annabel gathered her sewing basket, the Duke approached her in the quiet of the east corridor. "Miss Hart," he said, his deep voice unusually gentle, "I must thank you for your kindness to Margaret this morning." Annabel dropped into a curtsy, her cheeks warming. "Your Grace is too kind. Miss Margaret is a sweet child. You have accomplished what numerous physicians could not," he said, his dark eyes holding her gaze. "Your gentle heart has reached her when all else failed." The sincerity in his voice made Annabel's heart flutter. "Sometimes," she ventured carefully, "a broken heart needs only patience and understanding to heal." Something flickered in the Duke's expression, recognition perhaps, or memory. He nodded slowly. "Indeed," he murmured, then added more formally, "You have my gratitude, Miss Hart." As evening approached, Annabel found herself drawn to the castle's small chapel. Candles flickered before the altar, their warm light reflecting off the stained glass windows. She knelt before the candle stand, clasping her hands in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "guide my path in this place. Help me serve with dignity, despite the whispers. Grant me strength to help young Margaret heal." And double quote, she hesitated, her heart racing. "Help me understand these feelings I dare not name." In the chapel's shadowed doorway, Damien stood motionless, watching the seamstress's quiet devotion. The candlelight caught the copper highlights in her dark hair, creating a gentle halo around her bowed head. Something stirred in his chest, an emotion he had thought long buried with his wife. Her simple faith, her natural kindness to his traumatized niece, her quiet dignity in the face of cruel gossip. All of it touched something deep within him, something he had thought forever lost. He remained there, silent and unseen, as Annabel finished her prayers and rose gracefully to her feet. The sight of her silhouetted against the candlelight would stay with him long into the night. The steward's office lay quiet in the late afternoon light, dust motes dancing in golden shafts that streamed through tall windows. Annabel sat at a small desk in the corner, carefully mending torn ledger bindings with her needle and thread. The familiar motion of stitching leather helped calm her still racing thoughts after the banquet incident days. Before she turned another weathered page, then paused as a folded piece of parchment slipped free from between the sheets. The paper was creased and worn, its edges softened by time. Curious, she opened it gently, careful not to tear the delicate document. Her heart stopped as she recognized her father's precise handwriting. The ink had faded to brown, but the words remained clear. "Your Grace, today you live because I acted. Remember your oath. Should my family ever need protection, you will provide it without hesitation. A soldier's daughter may one day require a nobleman's aid. Captain James Hart." Annabel's hands trembled as she read the note again and again. Her father had saved the Duke's life. This explained why he had helped her that stormy night. It wasn't mere kindness, but a debt of honor. She found Damien in his study, standing before the hearth with his hands clasped behind his back. When she knocked softly, he turned, his stern features softening slightly at the sight of her. "Your Grace," she said, curtsing deeply. "I found this while repairing the ledgers." She held out the folded note with trembling fingers. Damien took it, his expression changing as he recognized the writing. His shoulders tensed, then slowly relaxed as he read. When he looked up, his eyes held an unfamiliar warmth. "Your father," he said quietly, "threw himself between me and a French cavalry charge at Malplaquet. He took a sword blow meant for me, yet still managed to fight off 3 attackers." He touched the parchment reverently. "I never knew he left this note. I had no idea," Annabel whispered. "He never spoke of his military service. A humble man, your father." Damien's voice grew thick with emotion. "He saved more than my life that day. He preserved the Wexford line. Without his sacrifice, I would not be here to raise Margaret, to manage these lands, to double quotes." He paused, looking at Annabel with new understanding. "I owe your family far more than mere coin," he continued. "That night in the storm, when you begged for help, I acted on instinct. Now I see it was Providence guiding my hand." He stepped closer, his presence commanding yet gentle. "I swear to you, Annabel Hart, you will never again know want or fear while I draw breath. Your father's courage earned that much and more." Tears welled in Annabel's eyes. "Thank you, Your Grace." In the days that followed, something shifted in the castle's atmosphere. Servants whispered about the change in their master, how his stern countenance softened when Annabel entered a room, how the ghost of a smile would touch his lips when she spoke. Even Margaret noticed, drawing pictures of her uncle with upturned lips instead of his usual frown. The discovery of the note seemed to have bridged something between them, a shared understanding. A debt of honor transformed into something warmer. Damien began taking his morning tea in the sewing room, supposedly to discuss household matters. But his eyes often lingered on Annabel's nimble fingers as she worked. One quiet evening, Annabel sat alone in the sewing room, carefully beginning a new project, an embroidery of the Wexford family crest. Her fingers trembled slightly as she selected threads in the house colors, deep burgundy and gold. As she worked the first careful stitches, she imagined the finished piece hanging in the great hall, a testament to her gratitude and something more, something her heart dared not yet name. The firelight caught the golden thread, making it shimmer like hope itself as she worked late into the night, each stitch binding her more firmly to Wexford Castle and its inhabitants. The winter wind howled outside Wexford Castle's thick stone walls, driving snow against the frosted window panes. Inside, the great hall stood nearly empty after the evening meal, save for the warm glow of scattered candles and one solitary figure. Annabel perched atop a wooden ladder, her nimble fingers working to mend a tear in the heavy velvet curtains. The castle had grown quieter since winter's arrival, with fewer visitors braving the treacherous roads. She welcomed the peace, though sometimes the silence felt heavy with unspoken words. The candlelight caught the silver thread in her needle, making it sparkle as she worked. The familiar task soothed her, and she hummed softly to herself, not hearing the approaching footsteps until they stopped beside her ladder. Still at work at this late hour? Damien's voice startled her, though it held none of its usual sternness. "Your Grace." Annabel nearly dropped her needle. "I wanted to finish before tomorrow's frost makes the fabric too stiff to handle properly." He studied her work with approval. "Your dedication does you credit." Then, to her surprise, he extended his hand. "But surely you can spare a moment?" Annabel hesitated, then carefully climbed down. The Duke's hand remained outstretched, an invitation she scarcely dared accept. When she placed her smaller hand in his fingers were unexpectedly warm. "I confess," he said softly, "I have not danced since ... before, but tonight the silence seems to want music." He drew her into the proper position for a waltz, one hand respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers aloft. Annabel's heart thundered so loudly she was certain he must hear it. They began to move, stepping in time to a melody that existed only in their minds. The candlelight cast their shadows on the walls, making it seem as though a dozen couples danced with them. Annabel's simple work dress swished against the floor, so different from the silk gowns that usually grace this hall. "I find myself thinking of you at odd moments," Damien admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "When Margaret laughs, when the sun catches the tapestry you've been working on, when I pass the chapel and see your candle burning. I think of you too," Annabel confessed, her cheeks warming. "Though I know I shouldn't." They turned slowly, their steps falling into perfect rhythm. For a precious moment, the world beyond the great hall ceased to exist. "The heart does not always heed what it should and shouldn't do," Damien said. His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "If things were different ... double quotes, but they're not different," Annabel replied softly, reality creeping back into her voice. Damien slowed their dance but didn't release her. "No, they're not. A duke who marries a seamstress faces more than just society's scorn. My enemies would use it to challenge my authority, my ability to govern these lands. The people who depend on me for protection and leadership would suffer. I understand," Annabel said, though her heart ached. "I would never wish to bring harm to your people or your position." They had stopped dancing now, but remained standing close, their hands still joined. Damien reached up to brush a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch feather-light. "You have brought more life to this castle in a few months than it has known in years," he murmured. "More light than I thought possible after ... double quotes." The creak of the great hall's door interrupted his words. They stepped apart as hurried footsteps approached. "Your Grace!" A breathless servant appeared, bobbing a quick bow. "Lady Eleanor's carriage has just arrived at the gates. She says the snow forced her to seek shelter here for the night." Damien's face instantly transformed back into its customary mask of noble authority. "Have rooms prepared immediately." Annabel was already withdrawing, gathering her sewing materials with trembling hands. She could feel Damien's eyes on her as she slipped away into the shadows of the servants' corridor, her heart still dancing to the rhythm of their shared moment, even as her mind warned her that such dreams could never be. Morning sunlight struggled through leaden clouds as Lady Eleanor Ashcombe made her calculated rounds through Wexford Castle. Her silk skirts rustled against the stone floors as she moved from group to group, her voice dropping to conspiratorial whispers. "Have you noticed how the Duke's manner has changed?" She murmured to a cluster of visiting ladies. "They say the seamstress practices common magic herbs and charms from the old ways." She pressed her hand to her throat in feigned concern. Why else would a man of his standing pay such attention to a penniless girl? The whispers spread like poison through honey. Servants paused in their duties to listen. Visiting nobles exchanged meaningful glances over their morning tea. Lady Eleanor saved her most damaging insinuations for the clergy, approaching them with perfectly crafted expressions of pious worry. The girl's influence over his grows daily, she confided to a visiting priest. One fears for his immortal soul, Father. Such unnatural attachment between classes can only be the work of dark forces. By midday, the Bishop of Wexford himself swept into the castle, his purple robes billowing as he demanded an immediate audience with the Duke. Damien received him in his private study, where winter light filtered weakly through diamond-paned windows. "Your Grace," the bishop began, his tone grave. "I speak not only as your spiritual guardian, but as one charged with preserving God's proper order." He clasped his hands before him. "These rumors concerning the seamstress cannot be ignored." Damien's jaw tightened. "I will not have malicious gossip elevated to church matters. The Church cannot sanction a union between noble and common blood," the bishop pressed. "To even contemplate such a match is to invite divine punishment. Your lands, your title, all could be forfeit. Excommunication would follow, leaving you stripped of God's grace and man's respect. You dare threaten me?" Damien's voice thundered as he rose from his chair. "In my own home? I dare to save you from yourself," the bishop replied coldly. "End this foolishness now, before it destroys all your ancestors built." Unknown to either man, Annabel stood frozen in the shadowed hallway outside, having come to deliver mended linens. Every word struck her heart like a physical blow. Tears blurred her vision as she fled to her small chamber in the servants' wing. There, surrounded by her few belongings and the tools of her trade, Annabel faced the cruel truth. Her presence threatened everything Damien held sacred, his position, his lands, his very soul in the eyes of the church. How could she let her selfish heart destroy the man who had shown her such kindness? The answer came with crushing clarity. She could not doubt as night descended and snow began to fall. Annabel moved through her chamber like a ghost. She packed her meager possessions into a worn cloth bundle, a spare dress, her sewing kit, the few coins she had saved. Her fingers trembled as she folded the half-finished tapestry she had worked on with such hope, laying it carefully on her work table. The Wexford crest stood partially complete, a testament to dreams that could never be. The castle slept as Annabel crept down the servants' stairs in the pre-dawn darkness. Her footsteps echoed softly against worn stone steps she had climbed countless times before. At the bottom, she paused to press her palm against the ancient wall, bidding a silent farewell to the place that had briefly felt like home. The servants' gate creaked softly as she slipped through. Fresh snow fell in silent benediction, already covering her tracks as she walked away from Wexford Castle. She did not look back, knowing her resolve would shatter if she glimpsed the windows of Damien's chambers. Instead, she pulled her thin cloak tighter and stepped into the darkness, leaving behind her heart and all her hopes of happiness. The bitter winter wind cut through Annabel's thin cloak as she made her way along the snowy road toward the parish village. Her boots, though sturdy, offered little protection against the deepening drifts. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by the crushing burden of her decision to leave. Wexford Castle. The stone rectory emerged through the swirling snow, its windows glowing with welcoming candlelight. Annabel paused at the wooden door, her cold fingers trembling as she knocked. Father Matthews, the elderly parish priest, opened it himself, his kind face creasing with concern at the sight of her tear-stained cheeks. "Child, what brings you out in such weather?" he asked, ushering her inside to the warmth of his study. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the familiar scent of beeswax candles and old books brought a measure of comfort to her troubled heart. "Father, I must confess," Annabel said, sinking to her knees beside his chair. "I fear I have brought great danger to the Duke of Wexford." Her voice quavered as she recounted the events of recent days, the growing affection between herself and Damien, Lady Eleanor's cruel accusations, and the bishop's threats. Father Matthews listened intently, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "My dear, love is not a sin," he said gently. "Yet I understand your fears. The world can be harsh to those who dare to reach across the boundaries of class. I cannot be the cause of his ruin." Annabel whispered. "His lands, his title, his very soul, all would be forfeit if he were to marry me. I would rather live with a broken heart than see him destroyed." The priest nodded slowly. "Come to morning service," he suggested. "Perhaps in God's house you will find the clarity you seek." As dawn broke, the parish church filled with villagers and nobles alike. Annabel sat among the common folk in the nave, her head bowed beneath her hood. Above her, in the elevated family pews, she could sense the presence of the local gentry, though she dared not look up to see if Damien was among them. The familiar rhythm of the service washed over her. Prayers, responses, hymns sung in voices both refined and rough. When Father Matthews began his sermon on sacrifice and honor, Annabel felt her resolve strengthen. As he concluded, she rose to her feet, her heart pounding. "I must speak," she called out, her voice clear despite her fear. The congregation turned to stare as she stepped into the center aisle. "I am Annabel Hart, daughter of Samuel Hart, and I must make something known." Drawing a deep breath, she continued, "Some have whispered that I seek to trap the Duke of Wexford into marriage, that I would use common charms to bewitch a noble heart. I stand before God and this congregation to declare that I cannot, will not wed his grace. Though my heart breaks to say these words, I would rather live in poverty than bring dishonor upon the house of Wexford." A murmur rippled through the church. Then old Thomas Cooper, the miller, stood up from his bench. "The Hart family has always been honest folk," he declared. "Samuel Hart was as good a soldier as any nobleman, and his daughter is cut from the same cloth." Martha Thimbleton, the baker's wife, rose next. "Miss Hart mended my boy's coat without taking a penny when we couldn't pay," she said firmly. "She's got more nobility in her little finger than some fine ladies I could name." One by one, villagers stood to speak. They told of Annabel's kindness, her father's courage, her gentle spirit, and helping hands. Their voices filled the church. The blacksmith's wife, the cooper's daughter, even young Will who sold vegetables in the market square. Each had a story of her goodness, her honor, a true nobility of spirit that the testimonies spread like ripples in a pond, flowing from bench to bench. Those who had whispered against her now fell silent, while those who knew her true nature spoke louder. Even some of the minor gentry nodded in approval at the Diorchbe de Forsindity, outpouring of support from the common folk. Father Matthews watched it all with quiet satisfaction as the truth of Annabel's character spread through his congregation. Already, he could see the news traveling in whispered conversations and meaningful glances. The story of the seamstress who refused a duke's hand to protect his honor would soon be known throughout the parish. The hushed whispers of morning prayers filled the parish church as sunlight filtered through the frosted windows. Annabel knelt among the common folk in their rough wool garments, her head bowed in silent anguish. Above in the elevated pews, nobles rustled in their silk and velvet, their whispered gossip carrying through the cold stone nave. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open with a thunderous crack. Every head turned as Duke Damien of Wexford strode down the center aisle, his boots echoing against the flagstones. His face was set with determination, his cape billowing behind him as he marched toward the altar. The congregation held its breath, watching their duke with wide eyes. "Enough!" His voice rang out, strong and clear. "I will not stand silent while malice and falsehood poison what is pure and true." He turned to face the assembled crowd, his gaze sweeping over nobles and commoners alike. "You have heard whispers and slanders about the woman I love. You have heard threats meant to keep us apart." Lady Eleanor, seated in the front pew, went pale as chalk. The bishop, standing near the altar, drew himself up with indignation. "Your Grace, this is most irregular." "No, Your Excellence," Damien cut him off, his voice firm but controlled. "What is irregular is using God's house to threaten and control. What is irregular is valuing birth over virtue, position over character." He moved toward where Annabel knelt, frozen in place. "This woman, Annabel Hart, is the daughter of a soldier who saved my life. She has shown more nobility in her actions than many who claim it by birth." A murmur rippled through the congregation. In the back, several tenant farmers nodded in agreement, having witnessed Annabel's kindness firsthand. "You threaten me with excommunication?" Damien addressed the bishop directly now. "For loving a woman whose heart is pure and whose character is beyond reproach." "I think not." His voice grew stronger. "The people of this parish know her true worth. They have seen her care for the sick, comfort the grieving, and work honestly for her bread." The common folk began to stand, first one, then another, until dozens were on their feet. "Aye," called out an old farmer. "She helped nurse my grandchild through the fever." Others joined in, sharing tales of Annabel's quiet acts of kindness. The bishop's face reddened as he realized the tide of public opinion was turning. Lady Eleanor clutched her fan, her knuckles wide with fury as she watched her schemes crumble. Damien turned to Annabel, who still knelt trembling on the stone floor. He extended his hand to her, his voice softening. "Annabel Hart, before God and these witnesses, I ask for your hand in marriage. Not because of birth or station, but because your heart matches mine in truth and honor." The church fell silent. Annabel looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The morning light through the window seemed to glow brighter, casting a gentle radiance around them both. The bishop stepped forward, his mouth opening to object, but the sound of the congregation's approval drowned out his words. The common folk were cheering now, their joy echoing off the ancient stones. Even some of the nobles, moved by the duke's passionate declaration, began to nod in acceptance. Seeing his authority slipping away, the bishop drew back. He could hardly excommunicate a duke who had the full support of his people. Such an act would cause more scandal than the marriage itself. With visible reluctance, he stepped aside, his face a mask of carefully controlled anger. Annabel's hand trembled as she placed it in Damien's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, as he helped her to her feet. The moment their hands joined, the parish bells began to toll, their clear notes ringing out across the snow-covered village. The sound seemed to seal their union with its joyful proclamation, drowning out the last whispers of disapproval. The villagers pressed forward to offer their congratulations, forming a protective circle around the couple. Their genuine happiness created a barrier that neither Lady Eleanor's glares nor the bishop's disapproval could penetrate. Love had triumphed over protocol, and the hearts of the common people had proven stronger than the prejudices of the privileged. Castle Chapel glowed with hundreds of beeswax candles on that crisp winter morning. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor where noble servants and villagers sat together, a sight unprecedented in Wexford's history. Annabel stood before the chapel mirror, smoothing the gown she had labored over for weeks. The cream-colored silk, a gift from Damien, flowed like water beneath her careful stitching. She had embroidered tiny roses along the bodice and hem, each one a testament to her art and devotion. Her red gold hair was crowned with winter roses, and her cheeks glowed with joy. The chapel doors opened wide, and little Margaret entered first, her face bright with happiness. She scattered white rose petals along the aisle, and for the first time in many months, her smile reached her eyes. The sight of the once silent child now beaming brought tears to many eyes. As Annabel walked down the aisle, whispers of admiration followed her. Even Lady Eleanor, seated stiffly in the back, could not deny the bride's grace. Damien waited at the altar, his usually stern face transformed by love as he watched his bride approach. The priest read the banns, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. I publish the banns of marriage between His Grace, Damien, Duke of Wexford, and Miss Annabel Hard of this parish. The words rang out clear and true, making official what love had already decided. When they spoke their vows, Damien's voice was steady and sure. Annabel's response, though softer, carried the same certainty. Their hands joined as the priest blessed their union, and the chapel erupted in genuine applause, from the highest noble to the humblest servant. After the ceremony, Damien turned to address the gathered congregation. Today, I present not my seamstress, but her Grace, the Duchess of Wexford. His voice swelled with pride as he continued, and today, we announce another change at Wexford Castle. Its doors will open to those who need shelter most, the orphans and children of our tenants. For too long, these halls have echoed with emptiness. Now they shall ring with laughter. Margaret rushed forward to embrace them both, and Annabel knelt to gather the child in her arms, heedless of her fine gown. Other children from the village, who had been watching wide-eyed from the back, crept forward with shy smiles. As evening fell, the celebration moved to the great hall. Firelight danced on the stone walls, illuminating Annabel's masterwork, the completed tapestry of the Wexford crest, now hanging in pride of place above the great fireplace. The intricate needlework caught the light, the golden thread she had used making the design seem to glow from within. Annabel stood in Damien's embrace, watching as children played before the hearth. Margaret sat among them, teaching the younger ones a clapping game. The great hall, once so formal and cold, now rang with the sounds of joy and laughter. To think, Annabel whispered to her husband, that night in the storm, I begged only for safety. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with happy tears. Instead, you gave me everything, a home, a family, and love beyond my wildest dreams. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.